Welcome to The Explainer. If you've ever tried to learn a new language, you absolutely know the frustration. You memorize the vocabulary, you drill the grammar, but then you hear native speakers actually talking, and it just sounds like some kind of secret code, right? Well, that's almost always because of idioms. So today, we have a very specific goal. We are going to master a whole batch of common, everyday American English idioms. And no, we are definitely not doing it by staring at boring flashcards. We're going to use this fascinating cognitive psychology cheat code to literally lock these phrases into your brain permanently. It's incredibly effective, and honestly, it's just a lot of fun.
Okay, let's dive into this. I'm going to challenge you to spot the hidden meanings in a really fast-paced, natural family conversation. We're about to drop into a scenario where these idioms are just flying around, raw and unfiltered. Now, don't worry about trying to memorize them all right this second. Just immerse yourself in the flow of it and see how many you can catch. Part 1. Ted's Day at School. Let's set the stage here. We've got Ted, his mom Susan, and his dad Bob. Ted just walked in the door, and Susan opens up with that classic inquisitive mom tone. "How was your day at school today, Ted?" And Ted, well, he responds with just absolute teenage angst. "Bad. I had a chemistry test and I blew it." Susan immediately chimes in, lightly scolding him, right? "Maybe if you didn't cut class so often, you'd do better."
Enter Bob, shifting the whole dynamic with this stern, fatherly, booming voice. "That's right, son. Stop slacking off and start hitting the books."
Ted gets defensive, of course, and fires back, stacking 3 idioms right on top of each other. "But I can't stand chemistry class. Besides, it's a lost cause. That class is way over my head." Susan just cuts right through those excuses with some firm, concise advice. You need to buckle down. Ted, fully leaning into this arrogant artist vibe now, completely scoffs at this. "When I'm a famous musician, people won't give a hoot about my knowledge of atoms and molecules." And Bob just snaps right back, completely dismissing that flawed logic. That's beside the point. Susan softens her tone just a bit here to remind Ted of his actual long-term goals. "We know you have your heart set on going to New York University." And Bob finishes off the sequence with this dramatic, definitive conclusion, "And you don't stand a chance of getting in there with such poor grades." So the crucial point is, how on earth does anyone actually retain a dozen totally different phrases from one single rapid-fire conversation? I mean, if you just sit down and try to memorize that list, your brain is absolutely going to dump that information by tomorrow morning. It's a guarantee. We need a way better strategy. This brings us to part 2, the memory palace technique. So to deconstruct and memorize that whole story we just heard, we are going to use Tony Buzan's memory palace. It's this brilliant cognitive technique that uses spatial visualization and environmental anchors to completely organize and recall information. Basically, you take a physical space that you can easily imagine in your mind, and you literally place the things you want to remember inside that physical space. Let me tell you, it is an absolute cheat code for learning. Okay, so here is how we actually make it work. There are 3 core rules to the Buzan method: linking, association, and exaggeration. See, you don't just put a boring normal word in a mental room. That doesn't work. You have to link these concepts to wild, completely exaggerated visual associations. Literally, the crazier, the weirder, the more dramatic the mental image is, the better, because that is exactly what locks it into your long-term memory. Let's put it to the test in part 3, the classroom nightmare. All right. I want you to imagine we're taking a spatial journey together through this haunted, totally chaotic school classroom. We're starting right at the entrance. The very first station is the doorway. Now visualize a wild student literally cutting the door off its hinges with giant, comically large scissors preventing anyone from going to class. The door just crashes to the floor. Giant scissors, cutting the door. Boom. That's your anchor for cut class. Next, we step inside the room and look down at a student's desk, and this brilliantly illustrates our next 2 idioms. Imagine a giant leather belt is literally buckled down super tightly over this massive stack of heavy textbooks. And what are the students doing? It's crazy. They are violently slamming their heads, bam, bam, into the books to study, right? They are literally hitting the books while the giant belt is buckled down. Okay, now look up at the front of the room and then glance up at the ceiling. Down on the chalkboard, the teacher is just furiously trying to erase this giant sign that says "Lost Cause," but it is permanently superglued to the board. It's totally hopeless. He turns around to the class and yells that arguing about the sign is beside the point, like it's completely irrelevant now. Meanwhile, look up at the ceiling. You've got these glowing chemistry atoms floating around up there, way over your head. You jump, you reach, but you just can't grab them because they are way beyond your grasp, both physically and intellectually. Let's keep moving across the front of the room. Over at the teacher's podium, visualize a completely panicked student plugging in a massive industrial fan and literally blowing up his test, scattering the papers everywhere in this crazy whirlwind. He completely blew it. Then, right next to that podium is the trash can. Someone is casually chucking a giant screeching owl right into the trash. Now, why an owl? Well, because an owl hoots. The student is throwing it away because they do not give a hoot about school. Finally, we conclude our little tour at the back of the room. Up on the wall is a classroom map, specifically a map of New York University. Stuck right in the dead center of it is this giant, glowing, beating red heart. They have their heart set on it. But there's a student trying to climb up the smooth, flat wall to reach the heart, and he keeps slipping down because he has no ladder. He simply doesn't stand a chance of climbing it. Totally defeated, he walks over to the exit door, physically climbs up on top of the glowing red exit sign, stands on it, and screams at the top of his lungs, "I can't stand it."
Okay, let's test that cheat code. Quick recall. Picture the room in your mind. What was happening over at the teacher's podium? Remember the giant fan? He blew it, right? And what about that exit sign at the back? The student was literally standing on top of it screaming because he can't stand it. Do you see what just happened? The images stick. By organizing all this information into a spatial narrative filled with these wild, exaggerated visuals, your brain just effortlessly holds on to really complex language concepts. It's amazing. So the next time you have a conversation, don't just listen to the words, build a room for them. Try creating your very own memory palace for the next big thing you want to learn and just watch how fast you master it. What will you build your first palace for?